Serious. Overnight hikers, hunters, and outdoors people, what creepy thing have you experienced in the forest? Story 1. My buddy and I spent nearly a year hunting for the perfect camping spot. After trying out several places, we stumbled upon one that seemed ideal. It was a half-hour walk away from any trail or road, perched atop a towering cliff overlooking a river. Once our camp was set up, we decided to explore the surroundings. As dusk approached, we started heading back, relying on the river's sound to guide us when something caught our eye. A shack. We stopped, exchanged glances, and figured we should check it out. It was too close to our sleeping spot to ignore, and it was downright strange. As we approached, we realized it was more like a teepee, fashioned from bits of aluminum, sheet metal, and a tarp. Inside there was an inflated air mattress, scattered wine and whiskey bottles everywhere, along with some adult material and an array of bizarre items that weren't your usual camping gear. This place was a couple of hours from the nearest town, like I mentioned, at least 30 minutes from any road or trail. Not a single vehicle was parked nearby. We would have seen them during our hike. We concluded that whoever had been there had left, and clearly, they wanted to remain undiscovered. As we were leaving, I noticed the campfire was still smoldering. We hightailed it out of there, swiftly packing up camp and blindly retracting our steps to the road. Forget that. I've seen enough horror movies to know that us teenage guys wouldn't be waking up the next morning in that place. Story 2. I spent 3 days kayaking in the Coorong, having an incredible time soaking in the serenity, surrounded by native bird sounds and fully immersed in nature. On the first day, I heard what I could have sworn was a human scream, more like a screech. I shrugged it off and kept paddling. Then, near the shore, I spotted what seemed like a body and found a seal torn apart. It was a gruesome sight. The poor thing scattered all over the beach. No footprints, just a seal in pieces. After the screeching and the seal sighting, I felt a bit uneasy, but I continued my journey. Nothing noteworthy happened that night, except for the splashing sounds in the water ahead, yet each time I checked, there was nothing there. The next day, I went out with the same plan. Paddled till I got tired, set up camp, and call it a night. Unfortunately, I got stuck in a mud bag, spending a solid hour dragging my kayak across to reach the other side, where I saw deeper water and sand dunes. After about 40 minutes of struggling with the kayak and bog, I spotted a figure atop one of the dunes. It could have been a random tourist or perhaps a kangaroo, I thought, before refocusing on crossing the bog. When I glanced back, it had vanished. Strange. I set up camp for my last night, a bit spooked by the seal, strange noises, and that figure. I kept my knife close, pitching my tent away from the water in an open area for better visibility. While having dinner, I sensed something watching me. As there was a total fire ban, visibility was poor. Chalking it up to nerves, I took a short walk to explore, heading toward the beach. The nearby beach is usually noisy with crashing waves, making what happened next even more unsettling. I heard that screeching again, and glanced back towards where I'd come from. Once more, a figure stood by the path I'd taken to the beach. I thought, forget this. Pulled out my knife and approached. There I found a week old fish hung on a fence and forgotten. Heading back, I heard what seemed like a kangaroo or wallaby hopping behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing. I retreated into my tent, praying nothing was lurking. It might sound anticlimactic, but nothing else occurred. I heard the screech once more, then silence. I learned later that there are a few indigenous graveyards in the area. I'm not superstitious, but this experience truly spooked me. When you're out alone in the woods, there might be something else wanting to join you, so be careful. Did this story make your skin crawl? Well, wait until you hear what happens in Story 5. The guy there saw something he wouldn't forget. Story 3. This memory is more than 20 years old, a bit foggy because I was so little back then. We used to camp at the same spot every year until we moved away. Anyway, one summer stands out vividly. I recall as we set up our tent, nearby campers dropped by to greet us and share advice circulating around the campground. It was about bears, the need to hoist food up into trees or something like that. I remember the guy offering my dad spare rope if he needed it. Everything seemed fine. Mom was uneasy, but Dad reassured her, saying a bear wouldn't dare enter such a bustling campground. On the second or third night, a crash in a car alarm woke everyone up. I remember covering my sister's mouth, afraid that her crying might attract a bear or something silly like that. There was distant shouting, prompting Dad to investigate. He grabbed a small skillet and his oversized flashlight and stepped outside. I shifted, noticing the small tear I'd seen during the last rain. Lots of flashlights and people gathered near the bathroom where a car's lights were flashing. Surprisingly, the chaos wasn't bear-related. Nevertheless, it was still scary as we found out that it was caused by a homeless person who had been sneaking into the cars and swiping belongings throughout the summer. Authorities suspected he was the same individual who had threatened 2 teenage girls on a nearby trail, leading to a temporary closure of the area. Story 4. I went hiking along Lake Superior's northern shore in Minnesota. It was a dense forest of ancient trees. There was this trail, about 360 miles long, stretching from Dulles to the Canadian border, with well-maintained campsites making it feel safe even when hiking alone. On this trip, my buddy and I wanted to make it a loop around it and not just the typical out and back. We found a route using back roads and a snowmobile trail, making our loop. Walking along one of those dirt back roads, we came across a random dirt biker. He zoomed towards us, stopped 100 yards away, and just stared. It's kinda unnerving, having someone lock eyes on you like that. Eventually, he turned and left. We finally reached a log shelter in the snowmobile trail that we planned as our campsite one. The spot looked peaceful, and we settled down for the night. Then it happened. In the dead of night, under a piercing full moon, I woke up, squinting through the darkness. I could have sworn I saw two looming shadows, moonlight casting their forms on either side of my tent. Was it a dream, or something sinister? I couldn't tell, but it sent shivers down my spine. I lay there motionless, hoping it was just a figment of my imagination. Story 5. I went backpacking in the woods with a group, and my insomnia kept me awake long after everyone else had fallen asleep. Waiting for light packing, just a tarp on the ground with our sleeping bags on top of it, as it was summer. Consequently, we were completely exposed in the open. Well past midnight, I was still tossing and turning when I heard footsteps. Earlier, I'd heard what I assumed to be a deer or coyote sprinting through the underbrush, but these steps were unmistakably bipedal. Whatever it was, or whoever it was, approached the clearing's edge, about 15 feet from us. In the pitch black night, I could barely discern a shadowy figure, making it challenging to decipher its appearance. It seemed to sway or peer around the clearing. Suddenly, it pivoted and darted into the woods, its footsteps fading into the distance. Only then did I feel like I could finally breathe, thinking about waking someone up. But then, from the direction it had vanished, I heard the most bone-chilling scream. I jolted my more experienced friend awake, hoping for some guidance. His response? "Dude, it's just a fox. Go back to sleep." I tried to explain what I had heard and saw. The footsteps, the sight, but he dismissed it entirely, insisting it was nothing to worry about and urged me to go back to sleep. I sat there, enveloped by a sense of paranoia and fear that seemed to stretch into an endless abyss. Every second felt like an eternity, the eerie silence amplifying the dread gripping my senses. As the darkness loomed, I succumbed, conceding to an extra dose of my sleep medication. The looming anticipation of the unknown horrors lurking outside became far more tormenting than the possibility of danger happening while deep asleep. Story 6. My boyfriend, an experienced camper, and I, a total newbie to camping, decided to set up camp at a local lake early last October. We planned for some glamping, s'mores, campfire meals, and a night in a tent by the lake. Unfortunately, our timing was off. We reached the campsite just 30 minutes before darkness set in, leaving us scrambling to set everything up in a rush. I'll admit I'm quite a scaredy cat, not at all into nature, and had to be persuaded to come along. Despite my uneasiness, I trusted that things would be okay and brushed off any discomfort as my own inexperience and overthinking. But that night was different. After dinner, we retired to the tent to relax before sleeping. The surroundings were eerily quiet. All we heard was the wind brushing against the rain cover. My boyfriend, usually calm and collected, seemed tense. He'd stop mid-sentence, wide-eyed, listening intently for any sound outside. I made a casual joke about skinwalkers, but it genuinely rattled him, and usually he asked to turn off the music. Around 9:30, we tried to get some sleep in the small tent. I could hear his breathing, and usually he was out like a light in minutes. But that night, both of us lay awake for nearly an hour. He finally broke the silence, saying he felt someone was outside our tent. I agreed instantly. Despite seeing no one, the sensation of not being alone was unmistakable. Once we got back home, he mentioned his thoughts about the hatchet we had brought along, a stark contrast to his usual self. He's a 6'5" pacifist who excels at resolving conflicts through dialogue. His anxiety shed light in the headspace that place put us in. It felt like we were in survival mode, a peculiar state for someone so at ease in nature. The entire night felt like the opening scene of a supernatural episode. Hastily, we gathered our things and sprinted back to the car. We didn't relax until we were well out of those chilling woods. While nothing explicit happened, feeling overwhelming anxiety and genuine fear for no apparent reason was undeniably terrifying for both of us. The thrill of adventurers calls out to the bold. If I were them, I'd rather stay and face the darkness than let my fears linger like ghosts. Have you ever had a disturbing experience that happened outdoors? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to my channel for more. Story 7. My first overnight backpacking trip with a friend, both women, began at a trailhead where I parked my car. We loaded our gear into my friend's van and headed to another trailhead to sort our stuff, intending to sleep in the van and start early the next morning. This trailhead was highly frequented, just off a main highway. We planned to backpack through a pass back to my car. As dusk settled, we had everything arranged. Most people had left. The remaining few cars in the lot caught my attention, particularly two older men who didn't seem like hikers. Their behavior was odd. They conversed at an unusually far distance from each other, facing us instead of each other. Whenever I glanced their way, they stood in different spots, watching us. An instant jolt of danger surged through me, like electricity tingling on my skin. Meanwhile, my friend, absorbed in rationing food, seemed oblivious. But then the men approached her, posing strange questions and commenting about a supposed big party, questioning if the trailhead got locked at a specific time. It might sound trivial as I write this, but their demeanor was unsettling. Their positioning felt ominous. I felt hunted. Without a word, my friend swiftly began tossing our gear back into the van. We rushed, our packing haphazard. Ripping my knife, I aimed my headlamp in their direction, prepared for a fight or flight, yet the men lingered, unmoved. We sped away before I could even shut my door. I was filled with unprecedented anger. It's disheartening to exist in a world where fearing for your safety is necessary. Story 8. Back in the day, I went solo backpacking in the Pecos wilderness of northern New Mexico, camping about a 6-hour hike from the nearest pavement, deep past PARANORMAL. I usually relied on an enclosed camping hammock, lightweight, bug-proof, and conveniently packed with a rainfly. No need for a pad or mat, just a pair of trees. Easy and perfect for a solo expedition. When you're cocooned in it, with a full fly on, there's no real visibility around. The top was completely enclosed by a bug screen. To get inside, you sort of wriggled into a slit at the bottom, your weight sealing it shut. It worked well, but was a bit of a chore to maneuver in and out of. I found a spot at the tree line's edge, the perfect place to cook on the meadow's border with a view of Santa Fe's Baldy. After dinner, tidying up and stashing bags in the trees, I marveled at an endless expanse of stars before nestling into the hammock for the night. Suddenly, in the pitch black, it jolted awake to crunching footsteps and the pine needles around me. The kind of awakening when you transition from deep sleep to hyper-awareness, utterly frozen. Not a sound escaped me. Unable to peek outside, lighting a light would turn the hammock into a beacon, blinding me to my surroundings. The crunching was still there, seemingly circling the hammock. I held my breath, unsure of how long. The crunching drew alongside me. I had no clue what lurked outside. Then something pushed against the hammock's side, and in that confined space, it meant pushing against me. I could sense its body heat. This wasn't a tent wall where you could retreat and lean. The hammock moves with you. Whatever it was used its snout, nudging or rooting against the hammock's side, as if sniffing something out. I remained perfectly still, plotting an escape plan, considering slashing the opposite side with my knife. It pushed again, gliding up the hammock's side. I felt the texture of its fur or hide scraping against the nylon. A sharp snort and it crunched away, unsure of how long I lay motionless. Eventually, the sun rose and I dared to step into the daylight. Surveying the campsite, no evidence of a visitor emerged. The pine needle-covered tree line left no prints or tracks. None of my gear was disturbed. The fly guy's lines remained taut, and no marks marked the hammock's side, not even a snapped twig. I'm not certain it actually happened. Since then, I've never dared to sleep in a hammock again. Trust me, you don't want to sleep in an enclosed hammock when you're all alone in the forest. One wrong move and that thing could turn into an instant body bag. Story 9. During my time in high school, the Canadian Army Cadet Corps arranged an unexpected trip to Barbados, involving a 3-week exchange with the Barbados Cadet Corps. Part of our itinerary included a few days trekking through the northern part of the island before settling in the bush. The mid-August heat in Barbados urged my buddy and me to opt for hoochie-style tents instead of the large commercial domes provided to our groups, each accommodating several campers. We set up our makeshift shelters facing each other, allowing for late-night conversations under the bright full moon. Most of the group had already been asleep for hours, except for the supervising members and the designated fire picket. Around 11:30 p.m., as my buddy and I were engaged in quiet discussions about our trip, we were interrupted by unfamiliar voices. It fell into an immediate silence, exchanging concerned glances and silently questioning the unexpected sounds that had disrupted our conversation. The voices seemed distant yet increasingly urgent and alarmed. After several tense moments of silence, quick and hushed footsteps approached us. A senior cadet, usually towering but now eye level with us, approached urgently and in a hushed tone warned us. "Something's wrong. Stay quiet in your tents." He hurried away to inform others. Time seemed to stretch as we remained on edge. Soon, deliberate and measured footsteps drew near, their soft crunching against the forest floor growing louder. As the steps approached, a man carrying a machete passed right between our tents, just a hair's breadth apart. We held our breath in silence. After a prolonged moment, exhaustion finally coaxed us into slumber. The next morning at 6:30 a.m., instead of the usual morning routine, we were assembled for an unexpected briefing. To our astonishment, it turned out that our chosen campsite happened to be a drop zone for who hastily left upon discovering our presence. Story 10. One night I went out for a solo camping trip. It must have been around 2 in the morning, and my campsite was situated about 2 miles away from my grandma's house along the river. I was immersed in my own world, playing some music when I began to hear faint voices. Considering the proximity to my grandma's place, I entertained the thought that it might be my grandpa. I turned off my music, intending to shout back if it was him. But then, amidst the quiet of the night, I distinctly heard the presence of a dog, which raised alarms in my mind since my grandparents didn't own any dogs. As I listened, my ears picked up on a statement. "The noise was this way." That sentence sent shivers down my spine. I immediately switched to survival mode, climbing up a nearby pine tree and perching myself there. It felt like an eternity, but around 5 to 7 minutes later I spotted a distant flashlight. My heart raced as I observed two figures approaching, accompanied by what I guessed was a husky German hybrid. They infiltrated my camp, rummaging through my belongings. It was surreal how close they were, shining lights around, yet somehow oblivious to my presence high above. After they left, I decided to head home. No way was I sticking around after that encounter. As I made my way back, I heard two loud bangs, sounding like shots. That spooked me, and I sprinted home. Once I reached the porch, I glimpsed the lights at the wood's edge. I swear I'll never camp alone again. It wasn't hunting season, so they shouldn't have been out with a weapon. And if they were, it should have been a short one and not a high-powered weapon. Still, I couldn't discern exactly what type of thing it was. This whole experience left me with severe paranoia, especially in dark forests. Story 11. During my teenage years, my friends and I had this knack for exploring deserted islands in the Indian River Lagoon known as the Thousand Islands. It was innocent fun, camping, engaging in paintball battles, and simply enjoying the adventure. One particular day, we decided to venture to a new island for a change of scenery. It seemed sizable, so we devised a plan. They would canoe around while I explored the southern end alone, intending to meet them on the opposite side. However, things didn't go as planned. That island was a nightmare. It was dense with brambles and bushes so thick that I had to wriggle through the muck on my belly. The perimeter was a swampy area littered with dead trees and covered in a film of green algae, but what truly shook me were the skeletons. As I navigated through, I stumbled upon one skeleton after another. Turtles, raccoons, deer. It dawned on me then, this was an alligator haven. Panic surged through me and I bolted for the open water, terrified of meeting a similar fate. I yelled at the top of my lungs and luckily my friends heard me. They paddled swiftly to my rescue, pulling me out just a third of the way up the island. That place earned the name Hell Island. Never dared to set foot there again. Too bad for them. They just missed the island's main attraction. I guess they were too scared to join the breakfast buffet. Or they're the main course. Story 12. Heavy breathing, unmistakably audible right outside my tent, startled me awake. It wasn't the laborious breaths of a hefty individual climbing stairs. It was something far more intense and immense. In the dead of night, there were no animal sounds, no grunts, just the resonating breaths of something substantial. I swiftly loaded my weapon, pointing it toward the source and braced myself, waiting. An agonizing couple of minutes passed until the breathing abruptly ceased. Sleep didn't visit me for the remainder of the night, and I dared not venture outside until the morning light broke. There were no traces of animals or humans in my camp, no footprints, no disruptions. Even now, the mystery lingers. Still can't identify what lurked outside. As an experienced hunter, accustomed to shooing away bears, that night instilled a fear like no other. Story 13. Hiking solo in Washington during late fall meant chilly weather and sparse fellow hikers on the trail. Halfway up a steep, winding climb, I decided to take a breather and sprawl out when two guys appeared, descending the trail. I greeted them with a wave and they responded in kind. As they drew nearer, one of them suddenly said, "Oh, you're alone," flashing a smirk at his companion. It sent a shiver down my spine and I think my dog sensed my unease because she stood up, fixing them with a stern stare. She's an 80-pound black lab, usually full of affection, but her serious gaze could be quite intimidating. The moment they noticed her, their demeanor changed dramatically. They briskly continued on their way. I couldn't be certain of their intentions, but that creepy encounter prompted me to select a far less conspicuous campsite for the night. I can just imagine those creepy grins disappearing into thin air. I guess even the most twisted minds don't want to mess with an 80-pound beast. You just reached the end. If you want to hear more stories that will keep you up at night, stick around for what's the scariest true story you know? Story 5 is guaranteed to haunt you forever. See you there.